Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska weather with us on this 12th of February. Thanks for joining us tonight. As always, all of the information provided here on this free service from the government is available on our website, weather.gov/Alaska. If you look for the TV link at the bottom of that page, you'll see an instant jump over to our TV section. It has just about every one of the graphics that we present you every single night. And you're welcome to use those any way you see fit. Have a good time and check out the surface maps. Those will be right there on the front page. But another little tiny link at the bottom. It's a little hard to see sometimes. Click on that and you get over to the aviation maps and the max and the minimum temperatures for the day, as well as some of the aviation charts. Of course, as we go through the night and into the early morning hours, we want to give you the very latest information every single day, and we do. But we start replacing those maps with information from the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit as they're updating their forecasts throughout the day, as well as information from our marine charts and other surface information there. So we start to kind of peel some of those off. If you've ever seen that and you come across the big banner that says expired, that's the reason why. So as we have the opportunity to update that throughout the day, you'll find new maps. And most of these are online by about 5 o'clock or so Alaska time. So make sure you check on that anytime you want. If you can't find what you're looking for, feel free to email me. david.snider@noaa.gov is the easiest way to find me online. Of course, our Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391, is an easy way to check your forecast by phone anytime as well. Situation in Southeast is improving. A lot of warm air moved in overnight. Not as much snow was widespread in some of those areas that we were talking about with winter weather advisories and storm warnings, but there has been snow and there continues to be snow tonight. A winter storm warning is in effect now and still for the Haines and Skagway areas and up the Klondike Highway. That should continue through the evening and overnight hours. And a winter weather advisory still in effect for Hyder for a little more snow in your area. So plan for that to continue for a little while longer. But overall, the situation is improving in Southeast. And there is more warm air on the way. Looks like blustery conditions will continue, and as you would expect, we're still in what we call an active weather pattern, which just means that storm wave after storm wave is going to be cycling through the region. Expect more unsettled weather to come through in the next couple days. You'll see the maps here in just a minute. A look up north shows that we have a lot of advisories out. That's the yellow shaded areas all the way from the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range to the upper Tanana Valley, around the middle Tanana Valley, so nothing out for Fairbanks right now, air quality concerns aside, and areas from Bettles down toward Tanana also under advisories, as well as the western end of the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, and areas around the Kuskokwim Delta. And the reason for that, yellow, are wind chill advisories, with one exception. For the upper Tanana Valley, this is a winter weather advisory, and that simply means that there is snow falling, might reduce some visibility there below about a half mile. If you're traveling around from Eagle to Northway in this general vicinity there, you can expect a little more snow through the evening hours. Everywhere else, it's mainly due to the below average temperatures and a little bit of wind that is knocking that wind chill index down into the 45 to 55 range below zero. So that puts you in danger of getting frostbite in about 10 minutes or less. So use extra caution when you're going outside. And if you don't have to, of course, you might avoid that. We also have a wind chill advisory for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast for the time being, but the red means that we're still looking at a wind chill warning. For the central Beaufort Seacoast, for Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, it looks like your wind chill values could still dip below 70 below at this point. So just bitter, nasty, dangerous cold. And you're looking at the Chukchi Coast around Wainwright, Utqiagvik, all the way down toward Point Hope, and you're saying, it's not a problem here. It's cold, but it's not that cold. Your turn may be coming next as we get into later into the weekend, maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There's a potential that a lot of that big cold and wind will be moving toward your area. So not so fast, Chukchi Coast friends. It looks like your opportunity may be coming up. So if you have a way to prepare now and get some of that traveling done, if you have to, it might be a good time. My apologies, our satellite delivery system into our TV show changed a little bit over the last couple days, so we're still fixing things up, but things are starting to improve. Tomorrow should be a little bit better, we hope. But in the meantime, here's what I found on the web for you, and you can look at this stuff too. Just type in the words Nesdis star goes west, and you'll be able to find images like this. If you can't, let me know. I'm happy to send them to you. Here's a look at the satellite picture. Low pressure right here across the Gulf today. Here's southeast and the Gulf Coast all the way out across Bristol Bay. You can see the clouds pushing up and over the Alaska Range. Everything here in the north, there's Brooks Range, snow, snow across southwest. We've got a pretty decent cyclone right here, and as you'll see on the surface weather chart here in a minute, it's pretty complicated stuff. We actually have one front moving into southeast and another cold front coming behind it because of the extra cold air being drawn into this weather system. Now here's a look out across the Gulf of Alaska water. So we couldn't see southeast very well in that picture just a minute ago. Now you can. Here's all of southeast. Here's the Gulf. Here's Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, southwest coast, and all the way out toward the central Aleutians. It's, again, not a full replacement of that full view of Alaska that we like to see. But I hope it'll get the job done for us, at least for tonight. So thank you for bearing with me. That cold front working its way up towards southeast is squeezing in a lot of that moisture. If we looked a little bit further south, we'd be able to see Hawaii just off screen of this map. But you can see a lot of that strong southerly flow moving into southeastern Alaska, and then we get into that cold air wrapping into low pressure. We get into actual convection showers. Wouldn't be surprised to see some thunder and lightning out here at times, and just a few days ago when this was a little bit further west, we were certainly seeing that. And you can see the next system coming into the central Aleutians at this point, and you can even pick out the jet stream and how it's up and down and all around right over Alaska. We'll get to that in our aviation chart here in just a minute. But the point of all of this is to show you we're in a very unsettled, or what we could call an active pattern. One wave right after the next, right after the next, okay? So as we look at the surface weather chart, here is that crazy front pattern I was telling you about, a 984 millibar low here. Here's one wave working in the southeast now, bringing in rain and eventually the leading edge of warmer air. Behind that, a leading edge of colder air, and then another edge of even colder air still, as this is all wrapping its way into southeast. This is going to move quickly through the region as we get into the next 24 hours, but the north side of that, for Northway and Eagle, we're still talking about snow, and that's where that winter weather advisory is. Elsewhere, north and west of that, it's wind and cold and sub-average temperatures there, so it's cold stuff. That's where those wind chill advisories come into play. We've got wind moving through the central and western chain, a 962 millibar low out across the North Pacific and moving into the Aleutians. That's that other wave we just saw in that satellite picture. That's quickly moving northward, and it will deepen tonight to about 959 millibars there. Gulf gales and storms going strong there across the central and western chain. Amanda Bowen will be back tonight with the marine weather forecast, so stay tuned for that in just a little bit. Across the north and eastern Gulf, you can see all those crazy fronts have pretty much fallen apart by the overnight hours and early tomorrow morning. On the north side of that, though, snow continues, and we still have that warm rush of rain and snow across a large part of southeast. For south central, not a lot of snow, probably still looking at some snow showers around the Kenai Peninsula and the Chugach, and on the western side of the inlet, along the inlet itself, it may be kind of blustery at times, but a lot of that wind doesn't seem to make it onto land, except for a few of the gaps and passes there, so mind that if you're traveling. Out across the north slope, a little bit of low cloud cover moving in up against the Brooks Range summits, coming in from the north. It won't make it all the way across the pass, but it might interrupt your travel if you're coming and going north or southbound. High pressure across the northern Yukon sits at around 1,033 millibars on Thursday, and working with low pressure across the northern Gulf. Again, that keeps that steady flow of cold air coming in out of the Canadian Yukon there and stretching all the way into south and west. So a lot of wind will be moving across the west coast. That wind chill factor will stay low as we get into Thursday and Friday. And then we have another vacuum cleaner out here across the central Bering, a 964 millibar low, a leading front pushing its way north and east towards southwestern Alaska, and another rush of warm and wet air staging just to the west and south of Kodiak. So this is moving northward, but remember that cold high pressure system's got to get out of the way, and the remnants of the most current system still has to get out of the way too. So what happens as we get into Friday, it pushes the remnant low over southeast out of the way and sets the stage again for some warm southerly winds working in, but some of that remnant cold is still there. And that means rain and snow for the northern parts of the Panhandle. Mix probably for areas in central sections, say Sitka to Gustavus, maybe Petersburg, and southern areas looking at rain. Low pressure just outside of Prince William Sound at 994 millibars will keep some winds moving through the northern Gulf. Probably a stronger area of low pressure across the northern Gulf generally gives us that very narrow band of fast-moving winds for a brief time. So plan on that around Cordova and east to Yakutat. And then remnant cloud cover across the north slope, and then just plain old unsettled out across the Bering. Periods of rain, snow, and wind. So If you're out there planning to go out there or have friends out there, let them know. It looks kind of choppy for a while. A 974 millibar low will also help to keep that ice moving around. Here's a quick check of temperatures for Thursday. Southeast lower to mid 30s, south central single digits but above zero. 23 in Kodiak, 29 below zero in Fairbanks, 35 below zero for Arctic Village, and anywhere from 30 to 40 below across the North Slope, not factoring in that wind chill again, which we know is extreme. 8 below around Nome. 15 to 25 below across southwest into our villages around McGrath, about 20 below there. High temperatures on your Thursday, upper 30s to lower 40s, the warmest around the coast around Sitka. 33 closer to Whittier and Seward, 33 in Kodiak as well, 13 below for Fairbanks, 2 below in Bethel, and it looks like 1 below for Unalakleet. North Slope communities looking at 25 to 35 below. McCormick about 7 above, 34 in St. Paul.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation now. It looks like IFR will be fairly widespread across the eastern chain, nosing its way into the western end of the Alaska Peninsula and also across the central and western chain there. You can see some of the drier air punching in, making its way toward Atka and moving east and north, heading toward St. Paul and St. George. A widespread area of VFR for most of the west coast, St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait included, and also into south central, the Matanuska and Susitna valleys, and into parts of the Anchorage Bowl, and even portions of the Chugach into western areas of Prince William Sound, but just barely so. IFR is also pulling into a large part of southeast, missing Yakutat, Cape Fairweather and Icy Cape there, up across the regions north of the Alaska Range. It looks like we'll see patchy marginal conditions north of the Yukon, another break, and then back into marginal conditions north of the Brooks Range summits, but not quite to the Arctic coast all the way. That should improve quickly by Thursday afternoon, leaving behind a large area of VFR all the way from the north coast down toward southwest, south central Kodiak Island, even into Prince William Sound. All of this pulling in behind the current low pressure system sweeping through to the southeastern panhandle. IFR will linger out at sea in some parts of southern southeast, including the Dixon Entrance, Ketchikan, Annette, Metlakatla may still linger under that low deck for a while Thursday afternoon. The next band of IFR is pushing towards St. Matthew, Macoriac, and just clearing St. Paul by the afternoon hours, but it is working east of Sand Point and up toward Akiak and Fognak Island. Out across the central and western chain, IFR lingers, of course. That will pull just north of a large part of the chain by Friday morning, but you can see that pushing into Bristol Bay now, Kodiak Island, and south and west of Nunivak Island, but marginal conditions should be creeping into places like Cooper Bay, Etolan Strait, and Macoriac by the morning hours. It's also creeping in on Kashamak Bay and Homer. Kodiak Island looks to be covered up with IFR, and southeast back in widespread marginal conditions with most of the mainland holding it VFR. Watch for some patchy areas of marginal conditions to develop from Atkusuk north toward Utqiagvik and eastward toward Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. Most of that will not take over the Brooks Range at this point. Most of the interior looks pretty good. Most of south central looks A-OK, including the Copper River Valley. IFR continues to hold out across the Bering Sea with marginal conditions tip to tail across the Aleutians and into Bristol Bay, also working its way toward Kodiak Island and southeast. You're back under the muck and the mire with IFR widespread all the way from Haines and Skyway down toward the Dixon Entrance once again by the afternoon. Here's your pass conditions in detail. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we expect to see some morning marginal conditions generally on the north side, but otherwise VFR by the afternoon. So if you can wait just a little bit longer, it looks like it should improve. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look pretty good. It might be a bumpy ride at times across the Alaska Range, but as far as visibility and ceilings go, things look to be pretty much okay. Rainy Pass, same story. VFR, but again, watch out for some of that turbulence in the wind through the gaps. Windy Pass, marginal conditions there, heading for VFR. Isabel Pass, similar story. Morning marginal conditions there, but improvement is expected as we go. Ventasta Pass lingers under marginal weather most of the day. Tanita Pass looks pretty good at this point, but again, could be a little blustery as we go. Portage Pass also looking pretty good, but you'll punch into marginal conditions the further east you go into Prince William Sound. And Chilkoot and White Pass, look for some improvement. And Thursday may be your day if you can get through in the afternoon. By Friday, conditions go back down as we just saw. Thursday morning, as far as freezing levels go, show that most of the state, most of the mainland, we should say, is below that surface freezing line. Most of that is just from about the capital city, west toward Gustavus, into Prince William Sound, south to Kodiak Island, and all the way back toward Cold Bay and False Pass. And there's just a little bit of overrunning right here, which makes me wonder what's going to fall there across the Alaska Peninsula as far as precipitation goes. So keep your eye on the weather there and watch out for a very minimal possibility of some freezing rain mixed in with at least some rain or snow as that comes in there, just because of that overrunning. Icing potential generally below 3,000 feet. Pretty shallow stuff here. It starts to move into a higher category as you move out across the west above 3,000 feet. Most of what we're seeing is isolated moderate icing risk across southeastern Alaska. The jet stream right now has a saggy, baggy area of low pressure across the western Bering Sea. Much faster winds here across the North Pacific at 150 knots, driving in southwesterlies into south central, and cold air spilling in from the north and west, heading for the Yukon at around 80 knots. At 9,000 feet, you can see our low pressure system there. Strong southerlies working into the eastern Bering. North and westerly winds, though, rule the roost for most of the state, 20 to 25 knots there, and a similar pattern across a large part of the Bering Sea. But at lower levels, low pressure sitting across the north slope is pulling in a little bit of a southerly wind across the north slope and driving in a stronger south and easterly flow across the west coast. North and westerlies coming across the Gulf 30 to 40. The main concerns for turbulence out across the west from Kodiak Island northward and all across the chain, generally below 4,000 feet for considerable moderate. Be careful out there.
What we're looking at is a legacy of the Ice Age. Permafrost and methane is a time machine. So what we're going to do is walk back in time. We're going to see old carbon, old bones, old environments, and none of those are in equilibrium with today's climate, so that's the problem. That world doesn't exist anymore, and it hasn't for 10,000 years. It was nicely and very delicately separated from this modern warmer climate by about this much moss. And when that moss goes away, whether for fire or for human disturbance or for warming, then all hell breaks loose.
Permafrost. It's maybe the part of the cryosphere that's most out of sight and mind. It's fascinating how it formed in the first place and how it got loaded with so much carbon. In a minute, we'll go back underground with Matthew Sturm from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. But first, let's meet Peter Griffith, NASA's project manager for the Above campaign, which supports more than 70 science projects studying forest and tundra vegetation, wildfires, animals like birds, caribou, and Dall sheep, methane emissions from expanding northern lakes, and the impacts of climate change on people in Alaska, Canada, and around the world. Many of those projects have some direct connection to permafrost.
Permafrost is the hidden cryosphere. It's the permanently frozen soil that surrounds the Arctic, all across Alaska, northern Canada, and then across Eurasia. The ground has been frozen during the ice ages.
During the ice ages, there was not enough snowfall in the drier regions of Alaska and Canada to form glaciers there, so the land was suitable for vegetation.
What happened is that over thousands and thousands of years, all of that plant material got compacted and frozen every winter and buried and pushed down, so that today there's 300 feet deep of frozen water and dead plants and some pieces of dead animals too. Sometimes you find woolly mammoths in the permafrost. But most of it, of the organic matter as we call it in the permafrost, is frozen plant material.
Some of that plant material is now thawing and decaying, releasing its ancient carbon into the atmosphere, sometimes in the form of methane gas bubbling out of expanding northern lakes.
We started this field campaign because the Arctic is the part of the planet that is warming first and fastest. And there are consequences to this for permafrost. So during the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, we're studying permafrost with people on the ground, from aircraft flying over the region, and also from satellites in space.
Another way to understand the permafrost is to take a walk below ground with Matthew Sturm and into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permafrost tunnel.
And they've dug this tunnel back into the side of a hill about 200 feet, And it goes sort of sloping down so that by the end of the tunnel, you're about 100 feet underground. And you're surrounded by bones sticking out of the wall from the steppe bison and the mastodons that are frozen in it. There's sticks that are 40,000 years old, that you can touch with your hand. There's grass that's still green, that's tens of thousands of years old because it got frozen, right away, and it's never lost the green color.
But as fascinating as it is to see these relics of an ancient era, or to see a tree split in half by thawing soil, or even to light a ball of methane on fire from under winter ice, at the end of the day, Peter and his colleagues want to know just how much organic matter is frozen in that permafrost, and how fast it might be released.
Currently, we think that there is something on the order of 2 to 3 times as much carbon locked up as frozen organic matter in permafrost as there is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So releasing all of that organic carbon from permafrost into the atmosphere would be a real game changer. That would be a tremendous transformation of the planet's atmosphere. Now, the good news is that it would take a very, very long time for that to happen. However, we are warming the planet at a rate now that calls into question how quickly is that changing and what the consequences in the near future and in the far future are going to be.
You're in the middle of a field somewhere in California at 4 in the morning. It's sort of surreal in a way because you've put so much time into it for so long, and actually seeing it over there is like, whoa, it's a big deal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen with a look at the sea ice edge. With that continued easterly flow that we've been seeing, we're seeing some of the ice that has been right on the coast of places like Nunavut Island start to shift a little bit to the west. So a little bit lower concentrations on the west and south ends of those islands. Also, this is going to be a pattern where polynyas are likely to form along the Bering Sea coast. Looking for some north winds, cold north winds to return this weekend, which may continue to spread the sea ice a little bit more south than the west that we've been seeing recently. For southeast, for Thursday, we're looking at winds generally out of the north and west, 15 knots across the inside waterways, with seas 3 to 7 feet. Over the Gulf side, out of the east actually, for the North Gulf, 10 to 20 knots, and 15 to 25 knots for the South Gulf. Looking into tomorrow, those winds coming up a bit out of the generally southeast for the inside waterways, but out of the north, 25 knots gusting to 40 knots for those northern inside waterways. For the Gulf side, winds shifting to out of the south, 20 to 30 knots, still out of the east for the North Gulf. Looking at south central, we see winds 20 to 35 knots with those highest winds south for Thursday. But where we see those 20 knot winds in the northern Gulf, we will see gustiness to gale force winds at around 35 knots. And then across Cook Inlet, 10 knots over the ice on the north side to still pretty strong winds on Thursday, about 40 knots offshore off Kamishak Bay. Looking at Friday, winds out of the northeast and north, 15 to 20 knots, so decreasing winds across the board, also decreasing seas to around 6 feet from the Gulf all the way out into Kamishak Bay, about 5 feet near the mouth of Cook Inlet. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, winds for Thursday on the south side out of the west around 25 knots, seas in that 11 to 14 foot range, but impacted by a bit of a different system on the north side, so 25 to 30 knots on the north side of the peninsula. Seas 3 to 6 feet on the north side, a bit higher, 11 to 14 feet on the south side. As we look into tomorrow, those winds are going to be shifting out of the southwest and west, 25 to 30 knots on the Pacific side. Out of the east, 15 knots over the ice on the north side, and out of the south 25 knots for the southern peninsula. Looking at the Aleutians, this is where a lot of the action is happening today. We see winds on the east side of a low pressure system that's centered over the western Aleutians. So winds out of the south, very strong, 30 to even 50 knots off of Atka and Adak. And seas also highest there around 38 feet, so very high seas today. Looking into tomorrow, winds come down a little bit and switch out of the southwest, 30 to 40 knots. Seas coming down a bit too. We'll see that trend continue over the next couple of days. Seas in that same area on the south side of the central Aleutians down to about 26 feet, still very high though. Taking a look at the west coast, winds are going to be out of the east, as we talked about, with the impact on that sea ice, 20 to 35 knots, strongest down south, as well as seas 12 to about 15 feet along the sea ice edge. For Friday, winds shifting a little bit, more southerly winds down by the Pribilofs, around 30 knots, and 25 to 30 knots still out of the northeast and east. Looking at the Arctic coast, right along the north shore, winds around 10 knots, both east and west up there. Along the west coast, winds more easterly, 15 to 30 knots, with those 30 knots just out of the Bering Strait. And into Friday, some winds shift a little bit, with winds more out of the north and northwest, 10 to 30 knots, with 30 knots along the west coast, and then east, 15 knots as we go further east off of Kaktovik. Recapping our weather pattern, we're seeing low pressure moving its way into south central and southeast, and that's going to continue to bring rain and snow, rain for those immediate coastal areas and snow a little bit inland. That should be tapering off a little bit, but our main weather maker is still coming with our low pressure system over the western Aleutians. It's going to move very little over the next 24 hours or so, into the Aleutians a little bit more, but they'll be on the backside. Thanks for watching Alaska TV Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.